food that has sugar in it. Fruit, for example. Sugar breaks down into alcohol. Alcohol breaks down into vinegar. For today's episode, we are going to use some apples that I picked up at the farmer's market and a pineapple. Not for the same vinegar. We're going to start with apple cider vinegar. I've got two varieties of apples here. These are Red Delicious and Honeycrisp. Now I picked these apples from the farmer's market because they're locally grown. It supports a local farmer, which I personally believe is very important. I picked this variety of apple, the Red Delicious and the Honeycrisp, because they're sweeter. Sweeter equals faster vinegar because it's a higher sugar content. You can use any variety of apple you want. The sweeter the apple, the faster the vinegar. For example, if you use Granny Smith, it's going to take a really long time. So I highly suggest using things like Honeycrisp, Red Delicious, Gala apples, things like that. Higher sugar content in the apples will require less time to make your vinegar. So let's get started. I like to use the peeler. It's just something I'm more comfortable with. I feel like it takes less time to peel those apples. You can use a knife if you're more comfortable, whatever works for you. It's important to wash all of your fruit no matter where you get it. You don't want any foreign bacteria getting into your vinegars. So you wash your apples really well, let them dry. I don't know about you, I have 4 kids. Out of those 4 kids, 1 won't eat fruit, so she's out of this snack. 1 absolutely loves apples. Another one who loves the peel but wants me to peel it for her and then eats the peel separately. So I tell her, if I'm going to let her have an apple, she either has to eat it whole, or if I'm going to peel it, she eats the apple and I save the peel so that I can make more vinegar. That way I have to do less work too. So we've almost got our apple peeled here. And again, you can use any variety you want. The other thing, I don't think I mentioned this, you can mix your apples. You don't have to use all Red Delicious or all Honeycrisp. Now I've cut this open and I found I don't like the center, the core of the apple, so I'm probably not going to use that, but there's nothing wrong with the peel. So I'm just going to continue cutting up my apple. I'm going to be careful not to cut myself. Please do the same thing. And I'm going to get rid of the core because I didn't really care for that. I'm going to set the slices aside for my kids to snack on. And I'm going to set my discard in one pile and then my peels that I'm going to use in another. We're going to move on to the Honeycrisp and I'm mixing it right in that same pile. Again, it's washed so that it's clean. This one smells really good. If we had smell-o-vision, this would be really smelling good for you right now. So the amount of apples that you need is dependent upon the size jar that you're going to use, and that's up to you as well. The more vinegar you want, obviously, the larger jar you need. And you're going to add water and sugar. Those are the only 2 ingredients that you need. Now this core is fine. So we've got a nice snack for our kids going or for ourselves. And we're not wasting. And you're not buying anything extra to make your vinegar. You're just using what's available. You can also, if you really want to, you can use the flesh of the apple. It just seems really wasteful if you're going to do things like making apple pie or snacks or anything like that. Use just the scraps so that you're wasting less food. There we go. We're not going to tell my kids that part was in there. They're not going to eat it. It's our secret. All right. So we have a snack for the kids. We have apple peels. And then we have our discard pile over here. So if you're making a small jar, maybe a quart jar, this is plenty right here. You want to make sure that your jar is freshly washed, hot water, soap, and then completely air dried. You don't want any bacteria in your jar to interfere with what's going to happen here. The next step you're going to do is you're going to take your water. I've got 3 cups of water here. I might not use all 3 cups depending on how much I put in the jar. And then we're going to take our sugar. I have 2 types of sugar. One is organic cane sugar, and then the other one is organic coconut sugar. Truly, it's up to you. You can use honey, you can use white table sugar, any kind of sugar except for an artificial sweetener, because that will not feed the bacteria that you need to make your vinegar. So any kind of sugar, you can use honey, local honey, clover honey, any kind of sugar, just not artificial sugars or sweeteners. It just won't work, and you'll end up with a jar of something stinky in a month from now. So take your sugar. For the apple cider, I'm just going to use the organic cane sugar, and we're just going to put it right in there. And you want it to dissolve as much as possible. So I'm going to stir that in. And remember, this sugar is what's going to feed those bacteria so that the alcohols can turn into vinegars faster. We're going to take all of these peels and the little bit of core that I set aside, and we're going to put it in the jar. Like so. Now again, if you wanted, you could take some apple slice and stick it in there too. Don't have to. If you don't like apples, but you like apple cider vinegar and nobody in the house eats apples, just take an apple or two and put it in the jar. So that's done. We're going to stir up our water just a little bit more. I think it's about ready here. A note on your water. I like to use bottled water or distilled water, filtered pitcher water. It's a little purer. You don't have to use it. I just like that it gives you a little bit more control on what goes into your vinegar versus a tap water, which is totally fine to use if that's what you would like to use. There's no rule saying that you have to use any particular water. So we're going to fill it up to about the bottom of the rim here, and that was almost exactly 3 cups. Now you can use more apples in there if you'd like. I think this is probably accurate for what we want to do. The next thing you need to do is keep all of the stuff from the top of this jar from being at the surface of the water. The reason for that is bacteria will get on the top of the fruit, and then that gets into your vinegar. So there's a couple of options that I'm going to show you. This is a fermentation spring. It just sits below, on top of the food, and then below the lid. It gives you some adjustment. The other one is a fermentation weight. It's a piece of glass. It's got a little handle on it. Kind of heavy. It does exactly what it sounds like it does. It weighs it down. Now, if you don't have access to those, or you don't like to spend the money, don't want to spend the money, totally fine. Ziploc bag. The only caution I have with this is please wash the bag, because these don't come in a sanitized pack, and so there could be things on the outside of the bag that you don't want inside your vinegar. So I just suggest that you wash it, soap, hot water, rinse it completely off. Then you're going to fill it with the same water that you're going to use in your stuff without the sugar. You just gently set it on top of there to fill the space. If there's too much, like I had a little bit drip out here, there's too much water in there, you still want to be able to put a lid on here. So just adjust the amount of water that's in the bag. So that's a method that you can use if you don't have any of these items. A fermentation weight, I think in this jar, would shove everything down too far and the little particles are going to float up. So I'm going to use this spring. And all you do is set it down, and then things float down to the bottom. And there's even a little piece there that didn't quite make it, so I'm just going to adjust it and do it again till I'm happy with where things look. There's a little piece that's floating, so I'm just going to remove it. Let me grab a spoon. I'm just going to take that out. I just don't want to take any chance that I'm going to get some unwanted bacteria in there. I can get it out. There we go. There. What I've got here is a fermentation lid. This fermentation lid has little holes in it and then a silicone gasket here that lets the gases escape. Our vinegars need an anaerobic environment, and that means that we're going to keep the air from coming into our jar, and that's what this lid does. Now, if you don't have one of these, it's okay. You can use the mason jar lid. It's just the cap and then the ring, and you would just simply screw it on there. Done. We've made our apple cider vinegar, and now I'm moving on to pineapple. You really just need 1 pineapple. We've got a big knife because big pineapple. I start with cutting off the bottom, like so. I'm probably not going to use that part, but don't get it out yet. And then I'm going to cut off the top. And if you're creative and you're making a party platter, you can make this part of your decoration. Just saying. It's one less way to waste. All right. For your vinegar, I have washed my pineapple just like I did with the apples. Super important to do so. And you're just going to cut off your trimmings. And rather than make a pile like I did with the apple, I'm going to go ahead and start filling my jar. And the reason for that is I don't need as much. I can just stick it in there like this. That way I can go ahead and get my vinegar made before I spend all that time cutting up. If you want to, you can use the core as well if you're making a big batch. One of the batches I did early on when I was trying to make this, I used a huge jar, and so I used all the peel and the core, and I did something wrong with it somewhere along the way, and it didn't turn out. So I started making smaller batches until I got it figured out. This stuff sometimes takes practice, and the apple cider vinegars that I made, I think it was my third batch that finally turned out correctly. Or was it the pineapple? It took quite a few batches for some of these to turn out right. I am by no means a professional at this. I'm a mom and a wife trying to do better for our family. I want to take things out of our foods that I was buying at the grocery store. Chemicals, additives, things that don't need to be in our food, that are in our food, causing cancer. Sugar is one of the highest causes of cancer, heart disease, things like that. So I'm at the point in my life where I just want to take that out for my family, for my kids, for my husband, for myself. And so that's how I started doing this, not as a professional chef, because I wanted to do better. And so here I am, doing better, and now I want to share that, trials, failures, and successes with all of you. So this is really all the pineapple that I need to put in this jar. Okay, so I'm going to take my sugar, and this is coconut sugar. It is organic coconut sugar. There's nothing else in there. Again, you can use any kind of sugar you want as long as it's not artificial. You can use baking sugar, you can use honey if you'd like. Just cannot be stevia or truvia or whatever the artificials are. You just can't use that because, again, it's not going to feed those bacteria that are going to turn your alcohol into vinegar. And it's harder to tell if it has dissolved because it's not clear, but it smells good. It smells like coconut, which might actually change the flavor of your vinegar. I did try this with one of my previous batches, and it's one of the ones that didn't turn out, and it's not because of the coconut sugar. This is something that people do use already. So I'm excited to see how it turns out and what the flavor does. But we're just going to do the same thing we did with the apple cider vinegar. We're going to fill it almost all the way to the top. And just like that. And then we're going to use the plastic bag. I took some of the water out of it, and it looks like maybe I need to take a little more out, I think. And this is, you just have to eyeball it a little bit and then try it out. And if it doesn't work, it might just be a little bit messy. Close it back up. Sorry if you can see me do that, because I hid it behind the jar. So it's about there. All of the pineapple. The whole point is to get the pineapple to stay underneath the liquid. And for this one, we're going to use the ring and cap instead of the fermentation lid. You will have to come and burp it every few days. And I made a label, probably a little bit more neatly than the other one was. You're going to put your label on here. There is one step that I forgot to mention in the apple cider vinegar, and that is after 2 weeks. At the 2-week mark, you're going to come, you're going to take your lid off, you're going to take your baggie out, you're going to remove all of the chunks. All you should have left is liquid. You're going to put the lid back on and let it set for 2 more weeks. So you're still at that 30 days, but halfway through you need to do that. So that'll be a step that we're going to do in 2 weeks. We're going to open these up, we're going to smell them and see where they're at, and then we're going to take all of the chunks out. And that's what you need for pineapple vinegar. I'm going to take these and remove them to the Let's Make Food from Food pantry. Here we are. It has been 4 weeks. We are ready to wrap up our vinegar. We have a little surprise for you too. But first we're going to start with our pineapple vinegar. You'll notice that I have changed the top of it, and I have removed the pulp as we discussed. After 2 weeks we took out the pulp. about checking on your vinegars, making sure you burp it once in a while. Forgot to do it. So when you forget to do it, this is how much pressure builds up. You can see this. It actually dented this metal lid because I waited too long to just turn this and let the gas out. You can start with this type of lid if you remember to just let the gases out once in a while. But once you take out that pulp, you're gonna need to go to a cloth or a paper towel, a cheesecloth. People even use coffee filters. You just put it right over there and put that rubber band on there to keep it down. That way the air can get in. We're gonna start with the pineapple vinegar. We're gonna filter out all the chunks, which also takes out the bacteria chunks. So it helps slow down that fermentation process if you're happy with your flavor. You can do this with a colander, you can do this with a coffee basket if it doesn't have that automatic pour stopper. I'm gonna use a coffee filter. You can use a cheesecloth, you can use a paper towel. The material that you use will kind of determine how fast it goes through your basket. So I'm just gonna do it a little slowly because this is gonna fan out and I don't want it to go over the top of my coffee filter. I'm just gonna simply pour it in here. And it should pretty quickly flow through. If there's a lot of chunks in there, you'll notice that it'll start to slow down, and that's okay. Just wait for it to go through. It's got a nice amber color to this one. It's just gonna keep going through. It's getting those chunks out of there. If you feel like it's going way too slow, you can tip it a little bit to get around those chunks that have collected down at the bottom. But really in this, there's not a lot. When I took out the big chunks, it took out the majority of everything, but those little bits that get in there, like the little spines that are on pineapples that sometimes stab you, you don't want those in your food for sure. So pineapple vinegar is the one I always filter. And you can see down at the bottom, there is a lot. I'm gonna try and tip it so you can see it really well. There's quite a bit of chunks down there. So when I get to this part, it's definitely gonna slow down. You can see how much it's slowed down already coming through this filter. So I'm just gonna tip it a little bit to get some of that sludge off to the sides and just make it a little faster. I'm kind of impatient sometimes. There we go. And I'm just being careful not to have the liquid go over the top of the filter because I really don't want any of those chunks in there. See what I mean? So now I'm going to carefully reach over here while this is dripping, and I'm going to grab a spoon, and I'm just going to gently, so I don't tear the filter, kind of stir it up a little bit and see if that doesn't get some of those chunks out of the way. Do this without knocking it over. It's like the slowest coffee drip ever. This is why pour overs take so long. It has to get through all that stuff in the bottom. There we go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about storage containers while this is dripping so that we can move on. Ooh, that was close. I'm going to hold this while I talk about our storage containers. We have wine bottles. Why wine bottles? Well, I thought it was kind of fun. Vinegar comes from wine. Vino, recycled wine bottles. Kind of a fit. But really, it's a great storage bottle. It's recycled. I enjoyed the wine that was in it. The one thing I didn't do was save the cork. This one was a screw top, I think. The liquor store near me sells these little caps. There's a rubber one, then there's this stopper. If you want to save the screw top, you can. I just don't know what materials are in that. These I can wash pretty well and just replace them as needed because I'm going to end up with this getting some vinegar smells to it, and I don't want whatever was in the wine to smell in my vinegar. So I just got some labels, and I opted out of the Scotch tape because I'm going to use these over and over for my vinegar. So but if you have your masking tape or whatever it is, just label it, put the date on it. You don't have to be fancy. Sometimes I like to be fancy. Another option is to drink some red wine and use the dark bottles, and that'll filter out some of that sunlight. All right, we got everything filtered through. I've got my little funnel here that I'm just going to place there, and this is the easiest step that there is. I'm just going to hold this still so it doesn't fall and pour it in. And one of the things that happens when you use the coffee filter and the basket is it gets double strained. And there we go. That is ready to go. I'm just going to use the cork, and it's ready for my pantry. All right, we filtered our pineapple vinegar, and now we're going to move on to our apple cider. This one I'm not going to filter. I'm simply going to take my jar, take off the paper towel and the rubber band, set them aside, and I'm going to pour it right on in here. This one I would like to develop a little bit more flavor, so I'm going to fill this up and then I'm going to stick it in my dark environment. There we go. Get all the little bits from the bottom. So with this lid, I'm just going to set it on there so nothing can really fall inside like dust, but I'm not going to push it all the way down so it can continue to get that air and develop that flavor. Lastly, we have apple cider vinegar from July 12th that we made as we were testing things out, testing recipes, working and learning, and this one developed a mother. This is acetic acid bacteria and cellulose from the apples. So the first thing we're going to do is filter it. The reason that we filter it is we need to get that mother out of there so that we can put it in here. I've already prepped my jar of apples, water, and sugar mixture for this batch. You've already seen me do it. I didn't think you needed to see me do it again. So what I want is this little disc. Let me see if I can get it so you can see it a little bit better as this filters. I want you to see what it looks like. I think I might be able to get it out without it going into the filter because I'd prefer it not break up. This is what it develops into. Even if it goes on my cutting board, I kind of don't care because I'd like for you to see it. There we go. Do you see that? It looks it feels like a jellyfish. So I'm just going to carefully take my mother and slide it on into this jar. In order for the mother to survive in its new environment, we need to recreate that acidic environment by adding a half a cup of what we have here so that the mother can continue to survive and thrive. So I'm just going to take a half a cup of what I've got, and I'm going to get down at eye level. I don't know if you guys do this, but I do this so that I actually get a half a cup instead of 3/4 of a cup, because if I'm looking down, I never measure it appropriately. So all I'm going to do is pour it in to fill it up. And then we're going to put on our fermentation weight. And don't forget, you can, if you don't have fermentation weights, totally fine. You can use your plastic bag with some water. You just need to keep everything submerged. So I'm just going to put this in here, and hopefully it doesn't spill out. Perfect. And that'll keep everything down. So I'm going to take a paper towel. I'm going to set it on top. I'm going to put this lid on, and sometimes it doesn't always screw on right. We just want it doesn't have to be screwed all the way down. You just don't want your paper towel to get disrupted, or you can use the rubber band. I'm going to label it just like I have everything else. I'm going to put it in the pantry, and it's ready to sit there for a month, maybe a little less, but it's going to be a lot faster than when we started from scratch. So I hope that helps you if you see that mother develop, and I hope you don't throw it away. It's a wonderful thing to process your vinegar with. If you liked today's episode, please click that like button. If you enjoy this sort of content, please consider subscribing to our channel. For notifications, hit the bell. As always, recipes and ingredients are down below in the description. If you'd like to suggest an episode, please do so down below in the comments. And as always, from our kitchen to yours, let's make food from food.